Hey there folks, welcome back to the Tower Tech, trying something slightly different, slightly new, slightly different angle of the studio today. Essentially what I'm trying to do is accelerate the rate at which I can produce some videos, but insanely busy at work, struggling to fit in decent content. Actually, I like just sometimes talking about something topical or doing a vlog. I've been using the Logitech Brio, which is a great little webcam, but I do find, despite the great resolution, it's capable of 4K, I do find quite a lot of noise, quite a lot of grain in my video. So I've effectively rigged up somewhere that I can put my Sony a6500, which is the main workhorse of the channel. It's basically on a GorillaPod sat on top of one of my speakers, so it's a little bit ghetto. But I've also moved over the Audio-Technica 2030 based on some of your feedback in the comments for the desk tour video. Again, be great to hear whether you guys think that that's better quality than the Blue Yeti that I had before. Also be great to know whether this kind of angle works for you guys. I think I've got the Ryzen PC in the background, so yeah, I kind of think this works. Toss me a like if you like that, leave a comment. Anyway, not what we're here to discuss. We're here to talk about GPU pricing or graphics card pricing. There's been an awful lot of stuff in the press, in the media, on YouTubers' channels, all about dramatically rising GPU prices. There's been one predominant source from this, and that is cryptocurrency miners going and gobbling up all of the GPUs, and essentially the Nvidias, the AMDs of this world not being able to satisfy demand of the consumer, struggling to keep up with the rate at which that stuff is being purchased. Most recently, there was a video on Joker Productions where he was talking about the memory that is manufactured that goes into graphics cards is actually now the same memory that goes into your iPhone or your Samsung phone, and actually Apple and Samsung are quite happy to pay a marginal amount higher than proportionally smaller companies like MSI and Asus, who are manufacturing GPUs. They pay that extra margin essentially to get the first cut of that silicon. So there's been lots of perspective from the US. I thought I'd spend a little bit of time just kind of reflecting on how the prices in the UK are being impacted by these things. So I approached this problem by actually going back through my purchasing history over the last decade or so to try and do some compare and contrast of similar positioned GPUs, kind of mid-level GPUs, high-end GPUs, and see how they compare as best as is reasonable to do so, because you're essentially talking about different periods of time, you're talking about different graphics cards, how they compare to the prices that we're experiencing today. And I managed to wind the clock all the way back to 2009, so just short of a decade, where I enjoyed what was pretty good performance from the GTX 295 at 2095. That was priced around the £413 mark relative mid-range card, should I say, for the time. I then moved on to the GTX 680. You catch me looking at my notes on my monitor that's just behind you. So the GTX 680 in 2012, a little bit of a gap between buying the GTX 295 and the 680. I got distracted with life and women and stuff. That was priced around the £480 mark. That wasn't a standard 680. That wasn't a reference design, as they were known at the time. They're now called Founders Editions, but essentially the reference card from Nvidia themselves. It wasn't a reference card. It was a Game Ward Phantom card, so advertised as being very quiet. Actually, it's pretty funky. You had little fans that you could pull out of it and clean. So £480 in 2012 for what was a pretty reasonable card at the time. Wind on the clock another 2 years and bought myself the GTX 780 Ti. This was certainly in Asus a higher end. It wasn't a Strix, but it was Strix-ish. Can't remember the exact model. I'll chuck a picture of it up here somewhere so you can see what I'm talking about. That was a pretty damn decent card. And that was the £780 mark. I should say I've actually gone through all of my accounts and checked all of these prices. So this is actually what I actually paid for these cards in these periods of time. And I'm a pretty savvy shopper, right? I shop around. I get pretty reasonable deals. I don't go on fool's errands and spend way more money than I reasonably need to. Wind on the clock again, another 2 years, GTX 1080. I got one of those from Amazon. I got one of those from Overclockers UK. Amazon one was around a £619 mark. The Overclockers UK was £649. And wind on yet again, I bought a Radeon RX 580 that was originally intended for the Ryzen build behind me. Unfortunately, the card was faulty. There were no more in stock. They were extremely popular at the time, so I ultimately replaced it with the 1070. And that was around about the 278 mark, so around about £280. I should also make it clear that all of these prices are inclusive of tax. The UK advertise all of their stuff inclusive of tax, or what we call VAT, value added tax. That's around 20%. So if you're in the US and you're trying to compare this, then you need to account for that, because I'm pretty sure most of your prices are advertised excluding tax, which is a bit crafty. They add that on the end. It's a nice little surprise for you at the end. Anyway. So the 1070 that I replaced my faulty RX 580 with, that was a bargain actually, £404 in 2017. Not that long ago actually. That was around about the August time, 2017. And I had a quick scan through looking at GTX 1080 Ti's. You can get a kind of a there's no such thing as a bog basement 1080 Ti, but, a conservative 1080 Ti with, kind of a reference card, a reference cooler, is going to be somewhere around the £830 mark, all the way up to 950 quid for the Asus Strix version of the 1080 Ti. So quite the range. There's £120 variation in the cost there. So what does all this mean, Michael? Why are you giving me a decade's worth of your purchases of GPUs? Well, let's take the 780 Ti as our reference point, and essentially what I've been looking for is a trend over time here. A very high-end card at the time, as I said, purchased in 2014. Now, I've done some calculations. I've accounted for inflation. So if you bought that card, which was £780 in 2014, accounting for standard UK inflation, I've calculated this on a website that does this all properly, above board and kosher, that same card in today's money would be £819. Cards then are not worth, well, money is not worth what the same as it was worth 3, 4, 5 years ago. Inflation is effectively devaluing what cash, what a pound, what a sterling is worth. So that card, £780 in 2014, £819 today, actually doesn't compare that unfavourably to the 1080 Ti, which we can pick up for around about the £830 mark. That's not strictly an apples for apples comparison, because of course the 780 I picked up was a high-end Asus card, had a custom PCB, had a custom cooler. Indeed, actually it accounted for people that were overclocking using liquid nitrogen. There were ways of dethawing the board and funky stuff that I had ambitions of doing that I never did, if I'm honest with you. So that apples for apples comparison really would have been, the 1080 Ti Strix, around about the £950 mark. So if you compare the 780 Ti accounting for inflation to that, you're talking about a 15% increase in the price. So at the very high end, it's a marginal increase. Interestingly, around the 1080 mark, absolutely no variation in the price at all. 18-ish, 19-ish months on, I bought those cards about halfway through. I think it was about July 2016. So as of today, end of February 2018, pretty much exactly the same price. You can pick up yourself a decent 1080 for the 649. These were reference or founders editions cards, so you know that's a good reference point to be looking at the price. The space that feels most alarming, if I'm honest with you, is that kind of mid-range. So that 1070 that I bought for a nose over £400, you're looking at £582 for one of those today. You know, that's a 44% increase in price. That actually hurt to say. The RX 580 actually, that was 278 at the time, now 389. That's a 40% increase in the price. And that's probably not a massive surprise, right? So round about that mid-range mark, the sweet spot for cryptocurrency miners who've been looking for best bang for buck, looking for the best return on their investment, effectively buying a load of cards, racking them up, mining some currency and looking to recoup the cost of those cards back quickly, have broadly been targeting the mid-range GPUs, ever so slightly dropping down into the lower range GPUs. And that's where you've seen the massive inflation in prices. And you've got to start to ask yourself some tough questions. You know, why on earth are you going to spend £582 on a 1070 when for 649 you can pick yourself up a 1080, right? Which is a substantially better card. You know, it's the same architecture, but, you know, it's running at a better clock speed. It's got more memory. You're effectively talking about 70 or 80 quid difference in the price. I can't do that maths in terms of percentage in my head, and I appreciate that is more money, but you're spending a damn sight lot more money anyway, and actually getting a pretty bad deal if you go for the 1070. I mean, the RX 580, I wouldn't even bother. The whole point of that card was it was positioned as a good performing but value card. It's kind of lost that entirely due to the demand from the cryptocurrency miners. So what's the conclusion of this video? Again, with my caveat that these are UK-based pricing. You know, if you're at the top end of the purchasing 1080s, 1080 Ti's, you're probably looking at a marginal or negligible increase in the cost of those cards. The 1080 definitely seems to be the sweet spot. That would definitely be my recommendation for you if you're building a new system. The mid to bottom range cards are seeing horrendous inflation that is disproportionate to the changing of value of money over time. But if you shop around, and I have had a good look around, you can still find yourself some pretty reasonable prices. If you want to take the risk at going for something secondhand, that's an option for you as well. Personally, for me, funny enough, I did a video on buying secondhand tech at the very early points of this channel. Used stuff can be great; you can get great value for money, but when you're paying above MSRP for used products that come with no warranty, and you're going to get very little help if you've got a problem, that kind of really doesn't float my boat. You know, the 1080s you can be picking up for a pretty reasonable price, and that's definitely my recommendation for UK-based viewers. For anyone else in the world, I think the advice is the same. Have a bloody good shop around. You can get decent value for money. You know, don't be sucked in for paying unreasonable amounts of money for stuff. If you've got a computer that works, it might be worth trying to sit it out. Nvidia have said that they're not expecting prices to drop. In fact, I think they went so far as to say they're expecting prices to steadily continue to increase through Q2. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm an enthusiast, and I'm sitting here waiting for the Ampere architecture of cards to be released. Now, whatever naming convention we expect that to be, GTX 2080 or 1180, I really hope the retailers, and it is the retailers that need to do this, sell those cards at a reasonable price, at a fair price, so that the enthusiasts, new builders alike, can enjoy that new architecture and get reasonable value for their money. There we go, guys. I've rambled on enough. Was my process perfect? Probably not, but take this from a real person who spends their own money on graphics cards. This is a relatively small channel, right? Nothing is sponsored here. I spend my own money on this stuff. I like to get value for money, so a nice reflection on my purchasing history, and actually, you know, as best as I can compare, there is an increase, but at the top end it's relatively marginal. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like and share it if you have. I hope you're really well wherever in the world you are. Subscribe if you're not, and I'll see you in my next one.